We are in Nehemiah chapter 12. If you have a Bible, I would just really encourage you to open that up and get to Nehemiah 12. If you don't have a Bible, there should be one underneath the seat in front of you. And we're going to be, we're about to close out Nehemiah. Next week, I think, will be it. Next week will be our last week in Nehemiah. And but let me just real quick just give a real quick recap of what has brought us to here. We've been in this book called Nehemiah, and we've been here for the last few months, and it tells about a time when the city of Jerusalem, the city that God had set aside in a world where these nations and these other nations and cities were pursuing life apart from God. God had set apart a nation for himself, and within that nation, a city for himself, so that the world would look at this city, the world would look at this nation and say, oh, so that's who God is. Like that is the one true God, that this city, that this nation would display the integrity, the strength, the character of God, and it would compel the world to worship the one true God. But about 150 years ago, prior to this book, the city of God, the people of God had decided to abandon God. They had decided to take on the rhythms and the routines of everyone that everyone else in the world was doing. They just got caught up in doing life however they chose, and they left God. And so God, because he is merciful, because he loves his people, he allowed Babylon to come in and take them over, to take them out. And Babylon comes in, they destroy the city, they burn down the temple, they take down the walls, and eventually, they take the people back to Babylon to be their servants, particularly the people of Jerusalem. Eventually, Persia comes in and overtakes Babylon, and now the people of God are under the reign of this wicked, godless king by the name of Artaxerxes. And about 150 years go by, 140 years go by, and a Jew by the name of Nehemiah, he had never lived in Jerusalem, but he hears about what is going on. He hears about the status of the city, that the walls are down. He goes to the king, and this is a long shot, but he said, would you let me go back to my city or to the city that really my family is from, and would you allow me to rebuild the walls? And the king says, yes, I'll let you do that. So many of them go back to the city, and Nehemiah rallies the troops and said, we got to build this wall. This is a disgrace to the glory of God. People are looking in, and what do they think about God when they look at this? And they all said, we're in. And so they build the wall, and it takes them 52 days to build the entire wall around the entire city. And they all look back and go, we know that was a God thing. We know that there was no way we could have had that. We could have completed this with everything that's going on. There's no way we could have completed that without God. And so in doing so, because they're so enamored by what did God do among us, they go to the streets. All of a sudden, 50,000 of these people find themselves in the streets. They call out for Ezra, who's the expert in the Bible, and they say, hey, come read the Bible to us. And so he reads the Bible, and they are just struck by our life looks nothing like what we just heard. If that's the way God designed our life to go, our lives look nothing like that. So what do? They do what Hutch just talked about. They repented. They recognized their life does not line up with that life, and they repented, and they confessed their sins and repented and committed that we are not going to live this way anymore. We are going to honor God with how we live our lives. And last week, we saw that where the city is being filled once again with people that love God, with people that worship God. And so how is this city that is supposed to point the world to God, what are they to do? And it just saw last week, they're just going to live ordinary lives, loving God, worshiping God. And everybody's got a part, and they're just making their lives every day, getting up every day, going, what does the next right thing? What is the next right thing in following God, in worshiping God? What does that look like? And suddenly the city is beginning to look like the city that it was meant to be, the city that points the world to God. And now we get to chapter 12, the second part of chapter 12. And honestly, this last part of chapter 12 reads like it should be the end. Like this should be the end of Nehemiah. We should read this today and close it and say, what a great story. That's what should happen. Because it reads like that. It should be the close of this book, because chapter 13 is just weird. Honestly, I'm just going to tell you right now, it's disappointing, okay? I'll let you in right now. It's disappointing, but we're not there yet. All right, so we're still in chapter 12, and it seems as though like this should be the end, because here's what happens. If you remember, they get the wall up, and then as I said, they all of a sudden are like, whoa, we got the wall up, but our lives are a wreck, and so they start working on their lives and confessing and repenting sin and getting their lives right, and then all of a sudden, now that they've got that on, now the people are back in the city. They're going, okay, now let's celebrate. Let's go back to where this whole thing started, and they go back to the wall to celebrate what God did when they got the wall up. And so they go to the wall to dedicate this wall to God. They wanted to honor God by dedicating this wall to Him. This is how this chapter ends, and I want this to be the end of the story. It just makes sense. So let's just walk through what happened, what this looked like when they go to the wall. Like, this is the big celebration after all we have been through. Like, let's come back and see where we saw God start. See how He started this whole thing with this wall. So we'll pick it up in verse 27. It says, "And at the dedication of the wall of Jerusalem, they sought the Levites in all their places to bring them to Jerusalem." So remember, if you were here last week, remember there's a lot of people that have chosen to live outside of Jerusalem. They had to compel, really coerce a lot of the people to come back to Jerusalem, to live in Jerusalem, because it's still a wreck. It's still a wreck, and it's a dangerous place to live. But now many people are back in the city, but there still are people that are outside the city. So a lot of them are saying, all right, go out into the villages and the suburbs and call all the people in, call the Levites in. It's just like here. We're FBCNL, First Baptist Church, New Lebanon. We are a church that is in this little town of New Lebanon. About half of you live in New Lebanon. Half of you live outside of New Lebanon. You live in another, like, you're still part of our larger community, but that's what's going on here. That some are in town, some are out of town, and they're saying, hey, bring everybody together to the wall. And we'll pick it up again in verse 27. It says, "And at the dedication of the wall of Jerusalem, they sought the Levites in all their places to bring them to Jerusalem to celebrate the dedication with gladness, with thanksgiving, and with singing, with cymbals, harps, and lyres. And the sons of the singers gathered together from the districts surrounding Jerusalem and from the villages of, those people. Also from another place, and from the region of that place, and then another place. For the singers had built for themselves villages around Jerusalem." And so what is happening is they're calling all of the musicians together. They're getting let's get the band together. Let's get the singers, let's get the musicians, let's get the band together, and let's get to the wall, and let's get ready to celebrate, to lead the way in celebrating this dedication of this wall. And so it says in verse 30, "And the priests and the Levites purified themselves, and they purified the people and the gates and the wall." So part of this preparing for this big gathering, this big celebration, this worship gathering, was that those who were taking part would not only be ready to play their instrument, would not only be ready to sing their songs and show up, but that they wanted to make sure that they were ready spiritually, that they were ready, like their soul, their spirit was ready. And so they go through this ceremony of cleansing, it says, to purify themselves. And listen, if I can just pause here for a moment, and I think this is something that we should take to heart. I think this is something that we should look at this and ask the question, what does this look like for me? That when we show up here to gather to sing these songs and to pray these prayers, and we're coming in here to be the church for one another, it's good for us to take some time before we gather to consider what it is that we're doing here. That this isn't just another Sunday where I just get up and go, because it's just what we do. It's a Sunday. We get up and we go sit in that row, and we look to the front, and we do all the things, and then we leave. And but what are we doing here? What is it that we're doing when we gather together to come in here? It's good for us to consider these things. And it's not that we have it all together. It's not that we'll ever have it all together by the time we make it to our seat. But we're ready to hear from God. That we're ready to come alongside one another, to pray with one another and comfort one another and encourage one another. that as best we know how, we are confessing sin. We're asking God to remove distractions so that we can be fully present to God and for one another. And so this is what they're doing. They're going, hey, before we go there, we want to make sure that that our spirit, like spiritually, we're ready. We're spiritually ready to engage in worship with our brothers and sisters. And says, then I brought the leaders, this is Nehemiah talking, he says, then I brought the leaders of Judah up onto the wall and appointed 2 great choirs that gave thanks. One went to the south on the wall to the dung gate, and after them went Hoshea and half of the leaders of Judah, and Azariah and Ezra and Meshullam and Judah and some other guys, and certain of the priests' sons with trumpets. Zechariah, the son of Jonathan, son of Shenaniah, and the son of Mattaniah, the son of Micaiah, and the son of Zachar, and son of Asaph, and his relatives, and all those guys, with the musical instruments of David, the man of God. And Ezra, the scribe, went before them. At the fountain gate, they went up straight before them by the stairs of the city of David, at the ascent of the wall above the house of David to the water gate on the east. So along with the band, along with the musicians and the singers, there are a couple of choirs that Nehemiah has appointed that are going to be part of this worship. They're going to be part of this gathering and this celebration. And so Nehemiah places the choir on the wall, and one of the choirs goes south toward the dung gate. And you can imagine what that gate was used for. Like, that's not just a name. Like, we understand that, all right? Like, that's where all the stuff was. And that's where you smelled all the stuff. And so you can imagine what that smelled like. And so Ezra goes with that choir. Verse 38, the other choir of those who gave thanks to the north. And I followed them with half of the people on the wall above the tower of the ovens to the broad wall, and above the gate of Ephraim, and by the gate of Yeshana, and by the fish gate, and the tower of Hananel, and the tower of 100 to the sheep gate. And they came to a halt at the gate of the guard. So Nehemiah divides the people, divides his choir into 2 choirs. He's got one choir is going to go to the dung gate. Ezra, you go with them, all right? And I'll go this way. It's what happens. I don't know if that was coincidence or what. But he's like, and I'll take the choirs to the sheep gate, all right? That's where I'll go. And so you have these 2 choirs. They make their way around, and it tells us they're on the wall. Like, they're on the wall. Like, this is not like against the wall. They're like on the wall. They're like up on the wall. And like, this is some wall, right? Like, you got these 2 choirs going these directions, and they both meet at the gate of the guard, which is where the temple was. This is where this is all taking place. This is where it's going to go down. This celebration is going to happen. It says, so both choirs of those who gave thanks stood in the house of God, and I and half of the officials with me, and the priests, these guys, a bunch of them, and the singers sang with Jeremiah as their leader, or Jezariah as their leader. So here you have everybody together, and they're singing, and they're celebrating what God has done. And then it says in verse 43, and they offered great sacrifices that day and rejoiced, for God had made them rejoice with great joy. The women and children also rejoiced, and the joy of Jerusalem was heard far away. So why did they rejoice? They rejoiced because God had made them rejoice with great joy. In other words, joy was not the point of them coming together here. Joy was the result of them coming together. They didn't call everybody to the wall for joy. They came together to celebrate what God had done. That was the point. To come together, let's celebrate what God has done. Verse 43 uses a version of this word joy 5 times. 5 times, whether it be rejoice or joy. But the point of chapter 12, the point of the gathering was not joy. It was to worship God. It was to celebrate what God had done. But in celebrating God and worshiping God, the result was, what they got was joy. That's because true joy does not come from seeking joy. True joy comes from seeking God. And God made them rejoice with great Joy. Man, I don't know about you, but I want that. Like, this is what I want. At a time in our culture where we are inundated with fear and anxiety and worry and depression and anger, I want this for my life and my family and our church. This kind of joy. A great joy that comes to us because God makes us rejoice. Man, don't you want that? So where does that come from? Where does that joy come from? Well, from what I see, joy is a result of at least three things. There could be other things, but at least three things. One, joy is the result of being forgiven. Joy is the result of being forgiven. We saw in verse 30 that they purified themselves going in. For them, what this looked like, purification looked like that they would go through these ceremonial washings. It was something like baptism. They would literally get into a basin or have a basin of water, and they would cleanse themselves. This was a real thing. They would cleanse themselves, and then there would be some sacrifices that would be made, and then they would put on these ceremonial robes that were white, and from the bottom of the hill, you would have these. I mean, this was a normal thing going into the gathering of the temple. This was a normal thing that they would. Sometimes you would see hundreds, maybe thousands of people making their way up the hill toward the temple in these white robes that they had gone through this ceremonial cleansing. They had spent a great deal of time, as we've seen. They spent a great deal of time coming to terms with what God's word says and realizing my life does not line up, our lives do not line up with that. And so they've spent a great deal of time confessing sin and repenting of their sin. And so now they go through these washings as an outward sign that they had gone through the rituals of sacrifice that God required to be forgiven so that their soul would be cleansed. And so they could go into the temple, into the gathering with joyful praise, knowing that they'd been forgiven. This is about 500 years. This right here, this is about 500 years before Jesus shows up. And here's what we have since Jesus has shown up. When John the Baptist first saw Jesus, if you remember the story of John the Baptist, or what John the Baptist was doing, and he was preaching. Oftentimes you would find him in the water, and he's preaching and baptizing people, and it's this baptism of repentance, and people are coming down, and he's preaching about Jesus, the Messiah that's coming. Jesus hadn't shown up yet, he hadn't made himself known yet, but the first time John the Baptist sees Jesus, and he knows it's him, he stops what he's doing, and he has everybody turn their attention to Jesus as Jesus is walking by, and he says, "Behold, the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the whole world." And he takes our sin, that you and I, we cannot get rid of our guilt. It is always with us. Our sin is always with us. Our guilt is always with us. And those thoughts and those secrets that you carry with you, trying to hide those things from God, is impossible. But Jesus, on his cross, he takes our sin. He takes our sin, our past, present, and future sin. He takes it away. And not only the sins that you've done, but the sins that have been done to you, that bring guilt, that bring shame, that have left you feeling unclean. You may have experienced, there's some in this room that you've experienced physical abuse. You've experienced sexual abuse. You've experienced emotional abuse. You may have been raped or betrayed or cheated on. You've been abandoned, and you've been left feeling guilty and shame and depressed, and you cover it up. So it's what Adam did in the garden. He covered it up. But it was sin done to you, and it left you feeling it. Listen, every other religion in the world will tell you where to go with the sin that you have done, but only Christianity will tell you that we have a place to go with the sin that's been done to you. On the cross, Jesus takes all of it, our sin, our guilt, our shame, and the result is being washed. He cleanses you from the guilt of the sin that you have done, and he cleanses you from the shame of the sin that has been done to you. And so that in Revelation chapter 19, John gives us this picture of this banquet called the marriage supper of the Lamb. And there at this banquet, the church is clothed with this fine linen, bright and pure. And that comes by the washing, the cleansing of Jesus. This is what Jesus does for us, has done for us at the cross. Sin is an intruder. Sin is a thief. Sin steals from you a life of fulfillment and satisfaction. If you remember King David, he's famous for a lot of things, killing the giant Goliath. But maybe perhaps number 2 in the list of things that David is famous for is he committed adultery. And when he is confronted with his sin, he goes back to his room and he writes this confession of prayer, this confession to God about his sin. And in that prayer, do you know what he says? He says, God, I'm confessing these things to you. Would you restore to me the joy of my salvation? My sin has robbed me from joy. Would you restore to me the joy of my salvation? John, one of Jesus' disciples, said in one of his letters, he says, if we walk in the light as he is in the light, as Jesus is in the light, we have fellowship with one another. If we walk in the light as he is in the light, we have fellowship with one another. You know what that means? He means if you could just lay out your life in front of people, if you would just lay it all out and just realize that you have a place to go with your sin, that you don't need to cover your sin, you don't need to walk around like hiding your sin because what will people think of you? But if you would just lay it all out, confess it, knowing that Jesus has paid for it, then you could have real relationship with one another. Because as long as you hold your sin in, what happens? You look at other people and maybe you have some sort of relationship, some sort of friendship, but in your mind you're thinking, if these people knew who I really was, if they knew what I've done, then I don't think they would want anything to do with me. And John says, listen, if you would just walk in the light, if you would just lay it all out there, then you'd be like, I got nothing to hide. And these people love me for who I am. And he says, you can have fellowship with one another. And check this, and this is why this is possible. He's not just going, hey, just lay it out there. Let's just lay our sin out. He's like, here's what he says. And the blood of Jesus, his son, what? Cleanses us from all sin. And he says, if we say we have no sin, we deceive ourselves, and the truth is not in us. If we confess our sins, he is faithful and just to forgive us of our sins and to cleanse us from all unrighteousness. Listen, joy is not the point here at the wall. Joy is not the point, but sin steals your joy, and a byproduct of being forgiven is you get your joy back. That you could be fully known, and you don't have to hide. You can know joy once again. The other thing that I see here is that joy is the result of living thankful. The joy is the result of living thankful. We see this in verse 27. We see the dedication of the wall of Jerusalem. They sought the Levites in all their places to bring them to Jerusalem to celebrate the dedication with gladness, with thanksgivings, and with singing. And then down in verse 31, it says, then I brought the leaders of Judah up onto the wall and appointed 2 great choirs that gave thanks. The point of this gathering and the songs was to thank God. Like, why are you gathering here? What's going on here? What's the point of all this that's going on, this noise, this singing? It's to thank God. The basis of them coming together was based on what God had done, on the basis of what they knew to be true. Like this, we have a reason to come together and to celebrate because of what God has done, what we know to be true. On Easter, we talked about how I mentioned that I grew up with this idea, and I think a lot of us had this idea if you grew up in the church, that Christianity, I think it's still among us, that Christianity is more about what we feel. That Christianity really leans into emotions. It's like, no, Christianity is about what we know. What I know takes precedence over what I feel. Christianity doesn't start with the heart and move to the head. It starts with the head and moves to the heart. Part of what we're doing when we come together on Sundays is we just need to recalibrate our minds. Like a lot of us, we've been out all week and we've heard things. We've had friends talk to us. We've had In fact, coworkers and boss would say things to us, and we've said things to ourselves. And what we do when we come here, one of the things that we're doing when we come in here on Sundays is we're going, okay, but what does the Bible say? Like, what is the truth? And we're recalibrating our mind to what is true. We come in here under the truth of God's word, and we're going, this is what is true. This is what I know to be true. And so we sing songs like that say these lyrics, like, and when I think that God, his son not sparing, sent him to die, then sings my soul. Because of what I know is true, I can sing. Thanksgiving begins with what we know. If you're going to give praise, sing with praise, if you're going to live your life with joy and come in with thanksgiving, you need to know some things. Because when people fail you and life seems to fall apart, if you don't know these things, you'll never get in on a thankful life. And so it's like, what's with the shouting and what's with all the singing and the thanksgiving? And well, let me tell you, here's what I know to be true. I was living life the way I wanted to live my life, and I found myself in a place where I was broken and helpless. And I cried out to God, and he reached down and he pulled me out of the pit of my own making. And he set my feet on a rock and making my steps, my future secure. That's why I praise. That's why I have joyful singing and shouting and thanksgiving. But listen, if you're still in the pit, then all these things that we do when we come together, it's kind of lame, right? This kind of praise and thanksgiving, and it seems pretty lame until you find it to be true. And for your whole life, in the normal day-to-day, you want to know where joy comes on a Tuesday morning? It's in living thankful. That instead of always thinking about what you don't have, you operate out of gratitude for what you do have. Instead of thinking thinking about the thing that God should be doing, you live remembering what God has already done. Joy comes from living thankful. And then we see that joy is the result of celebrating God. It's the result of celebrating God. They didn't show up to celebrate the wall. They called everybody together to celebrate God. So here's the thing. We all long for something to bring us joy. Like we all know, like there's something more. Solomon tells us in Ecclesiastes chapter 3, he says that God has put eternity in all of our hearts. Like we know that there's something more than this. Like there's a longing that I have that's beyond this. There's a hole that is the size of eternity in all of our hearts. And so what do? We spend our life trying to fill it. Ever since the fall, ever since the garden, when sin entered into the world, all of us have run to something that promises to leave us satisfied, that promises to leave us fulfilled. But in the end, it never satisfied. And so what do? We keep coming back thinking, well, this time I'll be satisfied. And it never works. Some of us look for that in ourselves. We think if we can find that in ourselves. There's a reason that the best sellers in all the bookstores and on Amazon, the best sellers are all self-help books. Because we believe if I can just get a better version of me, a skinnier version of me, a healthier version of me, a better looking version of me, a more successful version of me, then I will be satisfied. Listen, let's just be real. Let's just be real. Some of you set out 10 years ago to find a better version of you, right? And here you are. 10 years later, and you're still not satisfied. It didn't do it. You're just as frustrated and disappointed with your life as you were 10 years ago. That's because a better version of you is not the answer to the longing in your life. Or we go to relationships. We go, well, if I just had this, if I could just finally get, this relationship, if I had a marriage, that'll do it. Listen, I love my wife. She is my best friend. She is a great mom and a great wife, but she does not make a very good God. Like we live in this fantasy land where we think that somebody out there will fulfill all of my unhappiness and all of my insecurities. If I can just find that person, then all of it will go away. But listen, regardless of how perfect someone might be for you, they cannot fulfill the longing in your soul. Or you live your life through your kids. And everything in your life revolves around your kids. And I told you before, God help that kid. And God help anyone who has to be around your kid. Because you've created a monster. And what happens? The kid grows up, moves out, and mom and dad are left there standing, look at each other going, who in the world are you? Because they spent their entire marriage idolizing this kid. Listen, your children do not make good gods. Spoken from a father. Or we run to other things like money and stuff, right? Listen, I don't know about you. I like getting new stuff. I like it. I like there's something about getting new toys, new clothes that can be like a drug. And for a moment, isn't it true? You get that new thing, like whatever your thing is. Like for a moment, it's like, yeah, it did exactly what I thought it would do. This is awesome. My life is complete. Like I got it. Like I got the thing. But then what happens? That new thing becomes a what? Becomes an old thing. And no longer satisfied with my iPhone 13. That's a piece of garbage. I need an iPhone 14 or whatever it is now. I need that. Because money and stuff can never satisfy the longing in your life or my life. Or we run to religion. We say, well, I know something's off inside of me, so what I need to do is I need to get God into my life. So how good do I need to be? How much do I need to go to church? How much do I need to read my Bible? How do I give enough so God owes me? What do I need to do? What's the formula that will put God in a corner so that he has to give me the thing that I want? That's religion. Now look, none of these things in and of themselves, money, new things, relationships, none of them are wrong in and of themselves. These things are good things that come from a good God. But when you turn to a good thing and you make it a God thing, it becomes a bad thing. We make those things that God created for us to enjoy and we turn them into something they were never intended to be. And when that happens, instead of giving us joy, they just give us heartache and disappointment. And we're disappointed because regardless of how many times we go to those things, that relationship, we pile up that money, whatever it is, those temporary things will never, ever satisfy this longing inside of us. That's because the longing in your soul is created by God to be satisfied only by God. Not by the stuff that God gives, but God himself. Psalm 63, David says this. He says, "Oh God, you are my God. Earnestly I seek you. My soul thirsts for you. My flesh faints for you, as in a dry and weary land where there is no water." It reminds me of several years ago, we had taken, several of us had gone on a trip to Haiti. And if you remember, we were going, the bulk of our ministry was up in the mountains of Haiti, well, this particular mountain. And we had the missionaries we were working with, they had developed a rapport, relationship with a village that was about an hour walk down the mountain. And it just opens up in this little village with these mud huts and there's people are doing life. It's community there and no roads, no cars, they're just very isolated. And so that's where we would go. And so we would go to this river or go to this village. And when you go into the village, it's just kind of a bit surreal, kind of out of like a magazine. Because when you're on the side of the mountain, you look down like, oh, there's the village. And the reason you know there's a village because there's this big tree and there's this river, this little creek or a river, that stream that's running through. And this tree, this big tree, this river was being fed by this what is the word I'm looking for? The spring underneath the tree. And so you would go down and you would see people bathing in the river and animals in the river. I mean, all this was happening. And so you would cross this creek to get, or this river to get into the village. And so we were on our way back. We had just done some work there in the village, and we were on our way back up the mountain. It took a lot longer to get back than it did to get to the village. And it was hot and dry, and our water was running out. Like, we all brought water, it was running out. And so we had these little bags that had filters on them. They told it was safe that if we were to, use the water, fill our bags, these little pouches with the water, that we would be okay. And so we did. We had these pouches, we filled them up, and they told us that if you would just fill them up right under the tree, so that way the runoff from the bathing and the animals would not, it'll be all right. And I just be honest with you, I didn't buy it. I just didn't think, I don't think that whatever this nozzle is going to take away that. I didn't believe it. And so we're on our way back, and I'm trying everything I can just to kind of keep it together because I don't have any water, but it is hot, and we're going uphill, up this mountain, and finally I'm like, I can't do it anymore. I'm going to need some water. And so we stopped, and I'm like, I don't know what to do. And so somebody pulled out their water, and I'm like, all right, if they do it. I'm not going first. A great leader, a great pastor said if they do it, I'll kind of watch what happens to them, and then if it's all good, I'll go, because I'm desperate. And so that's what happened. So they did it, it's all good. And so I drank the water. And here's the thing. When at that moment, only thing that I'd craved was water. I needed water. My body, and when you're thirsty for water, nothing else works. You could have offered me a steak dinner on the side of that mountain, right there in Haiti, and I would have said, no way. What I want is some water. I need water. That's David. He's going, God, if I don't get you, I die. I just want you. God, I desire you, more of you, to know you. That the greatest gift that we get in salvation is that we get God. Not simply heaven when we die. When you read about heaven in Revelation, the descriptions seem to always come back to God, the lion and the lamb, the king on his throne. And yet a lot of us read that and go, okay, so what else? We got these pictures, this description of God, of the lion, the lamb, and all that, but what else? And we become so fascinated with heaven because of gold streets, and grandma's going to be there, and no sadness, and my golf score is going to be amazing. But the greatest part of heaven is that you get God, fully known as he is. Do you long for God? Or do you long for his stuff? If you didn't get all the stuff that you're hoping that heaven is like, and yet all you got was God, would you be disappointed? When you pray, and are your prayers filled with a desire to know him or a desire for what he can give? This isn't subscribing to religion. This isn't begrudging submission that I'd better behave now because I'm a Christian. This is, God, I just want you. I want to know you. You see, that's very different than this whole idea of, you just tell me what I need to do to get into heaven when I die. Oh, say that prayer? Tell me how to say that prayer? Okay. I'll do that thing, ask Jesus in my heart. Okay, is that all? Great. All right, now I'll go about my life. No, it is the greatest gift in my life is to know God. And the result is joy. And so something happens in these people as a result. And so they go there to celebrate God, and they've confessed their sin, and they're giving thanks, and something happens in these people as a result of the joy that comes over them. They get in on the things that God is about. This is how the chapter closes out. It says, on that day men were appointed over the storerooms, the contributions, the first fruits, and the tithes, to gather into them the portions required by the law for the priests and for the Levites, according to the fields of the towns. For Judah rejoiced over the priests and the Levites who ministered, and they performed the service of their God and the service of purification, as did the singers and the gatekeepers, according to the command of David and his son. For long ago in the days of David and Asaph, there were directors of the singers, and there were songs of praise and thanksgiving to God. And all Israel in the days of Zerubbabel and the days of Nehemiah gave the daily portions for the singers and the gatekeepers, and they set apart that which was for the Levites, and the Levites set apart that which was for the sons of Aaron. It's something that happens in you when you pursue God. Actually, I'm standing backstage listening to Hutch share his story, and it's amazing. I mean, we don't coordinate these stories with sermons, but him talking about coming to a place of repentance, and all of a sudden his desires begin to change. His desires begin to line up with God's desires. God's desires for his life, for his marriage, for his family. See, this is what happens. What happens when you pursue God, God's desires become your desires. You become untied to money and stuff. But you see money and stuff for what it really is, belonging to God to be used to make God known, particularly through his church. That there's more to life than just making sure you and your family is all buttoned up. But you look into the world, you see the poor, you see the hungry, you see the widow, the orphans, and your heart breaks. Throughout the scripture, we see the heart of God for the poor. We see the heart of God for the hungry and the widows and the orphans. Later on in the New Testament, when Jesus shows up, Jesus in Matthew, Jesus is he talks about the judgment that is coming, where there will be this final separation for those who belong to Jesus and those who don't. And here's what he talks about. He says, there's coming a day when Jesus, he knows how it's all going down. Like he knows where everybody's heart is. Like he sees the heart of man. Like he knows what's going on. And he will be the final judge. And it talks about how he's going to there's this separation that's going to happen. And they use this terms of sheep and goats. He separates the sheep from the goats. And the sheep are his. The goats are imposters. And Jesus said that one of the marks of the sheep, one of the marks of those that belong to him, they are the ones who fed the hungry, who welcomed the immigrant, who clothed the poor, who visited the prisoners. This is why we as a church, we've got to be about these things. It's not about charity, it's about justice. That God sees the poor, he sees the hungry, the widow, the orphan, the prisoner, the immigrant, the outcast of society, and God sees them, and at the same time, he's got his eye on the church to make it their responsibility to see that they're cared for. So this is why we participate in things like Operation Christmas Child. And we provide gifts for families in our community around Christmas, and we open our doors to the community for Thanksgiving. And this is why every single week, every Wednesday evening, we feed and clothe families through our village pantry and our clothespin. That God puts it in his people to see that these people are cared for. And so just to give you an idea of what that has looked like here, just in terms of what we do every week, I'm going to, just in terms of the food that we have been giving out. So 2019, we started something called the Village Food Pantry here. And man, who knew what was coming in 2020, right? We had no idea, obviously. But we just like, hey, there's a need. Can we do something about this? And we started serving Jesus by giving food and clothes out in our community through the food pantry and the clothespin. And 2019, I think we got some numbers. We served 151 households in 2019. We had more than 150 households come through. We were able to serve food to, and that's not like a meal. We're talking about like we're giving groceries for the week and use these. And we've been able to we've been able since then to make this food pantry like a mobile food pantry and take it out. And you see a picture if you've never been down in our food pantry. It's in the basement of the old part of the church, and these kinds of things are happening right here. What you see, there's kind of a gathering area for those that are waiting to go into the pantry or the pen or the clothespin, and we use that opportunity to make connections, to have prayer with people. And here you see, like this was us giving out some meals at, I believe this was Thanksgiving or Easter, one of the two. So that was in 2019. We served 151 households 2023, just 4 years later, we served over 1,300 households. This is what, praise the Lord. So here's the thing. I told you a few months ago that we were able to purchase a building because what the area we have right now, we've outgrown it. It is not only have we outgrown it, but it is not accessible to a lot of people in our community because you have to go downstairs to get there. And so by God's grace, there is a building right there that sits just adjacent to our property, and we ended up having a conversation with the gentleman that owned the building, and we purchased that. It was not for sale, but he agreed to sell it to us, and we just got occupancy of that building this past week. And the purpose of that building is to house the food pantry and the clothespin. That's why we got it. And I told you at that time when we purchased it, like by God's grace, we had the money to go ahead and purchase it. Like we didn't have to take a loan, nothing like that. We had the money on hand to just outright purchase that building in a building fund that we had. And I told you at that time, I'd be coming back to you, right? Because that building needs some help. It needs some help. It's been used as an HVAC a company for years and years and years, not to serve food to people in our community. Okay, so it needs some help. And so what we have, let me just give you an idea of what we're looking at this building. This is the idea. And so what this would be is when you walk in on this side, this would be the gathering area. It would have tables and chairs and a coffee kind of area, just like similar to what we have out in the lobby here. But just a space for us, again, to connect with people. This is not something that we hope to do in the future. This is something that we're doing right now. We're praying with people. We're sharing the gospel with people, having gospel conversations. The front part of that building would be used for that purpose. And then you go to the back of the building. It's divided into two areas, and it would be the food pantry on one side and the clothespin on the other. This gives us, as you can imagine, it gives us so much more space. If you've gone downstairs, there's lots of rooms that there's a piece of the clothespin or the food pantry that has kind of taken over the room, taken over the basement. And we have need for more classroom space here as we're talking right now, more classroom space in our building. And so there's a lot of need that this is going to help us tremendously. And then and along with that you have experienced this coming in for some time, that we have serious parking lot needs in our church. When we built our lobby, we were able to take care of a good chunk of resurfacing a parking lot, but we have a whole other chunk. We've got like a Grand Canyon out there that you got to cross through every time you come in. It's just falling apart. It's beyond repair. We need to resurface it, and it's just expensive. And we just didn't have the funds at the time to do it. And so we were like, hey, let's do what we can, and then we'll come back to it. And so that needs to be done. And we just have, by God's grace, look around, we need more parking space. We just need more parking space. And so we're going to take that. There's a little corner out there in the parking area that we're going to fill in. It's going to give us some more spots. And also we want to connect the parking lot of the new building for the food pantry and the clothespin to our current parking space. We're projecting this cost for all this, and along with that, we bought a property a few years ago out on Main Street that we wanted to have access, people to see, to know that we're back here, we're tucked back in here. There is a church back here. We're out here, and so that came open, and we bought that property. Really, we wanted to have some sort of face out there on Main Street. And so our intention has been for a long time to put a sign out there to let people know what's going on, and just to let people know that we are back here. All of this, we're projecting it's going to cost about $400,000 to do everything. That's to rehab this building, to make it what we need. We need a place to make, to have to store food and refrigeration, we're just going to have to rehab the whole thing, and that's the part. That's everything. It's going to be about $400,000. As you can imagine, it is going to take many of us to see this through. Like, we got to do this. Like, it's us. It's going to take a lot of us to see this through. And listen, that price, that cost is not as high as it could be, because we got a lot of people in our church that are able to do things. And we, just like we did with this building and this room you're in right now, we did, the majority of all this was done in-house, because we have capable men and women to do this. And so here's just going forward, this is what this is going to look like. I'm just asking you to consider what God might you do and give in this season, so that we can see this through. If you are a member, if you're a regular tender of FBCNL, this week you'll be receiving an info sheet with a pledge card. And I'm just asking you, would you just take it and read it and pray about it, and just pray with your family, and just ask God, what would you have us do for the next 2 years to give to this project? God has been so faithful to us. We put on here, we're not done yet. We're not done yet. The world is broken. The world is still broken, and God is still saving people. And God has given us the gospel to bring reconciliation and life to this broken world. And God is using his church, and he's in this little corner of the world. God is using FBCNL to bring light into the darkness. God has been so faithful to us. He continues to draw people to Christ through his people here at FBCNL, and he continues to make us a people who are growing in our love for Christ and our love for each other. We have much to celebrate of God's faithfulness and power and steadfast love. Amen? Joy is not the point of the story. Joy is the result of the story. If you are chasing down joy, you will become like the rest of culture. But if you are pursuing Jesus, the glory of God, celebrating God, getting in what God is doing, then you will find joy come knocking at your door.